Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And at long last, I hear all of you saying out there, we are moving into hour number 2. And that means we're joined by two of my favourite guests, because I always learn something when they're on. Their information, it's the kind of thing that makes me shut up, pay attention. And there's a lot to be learned when we listen to Evan and Stephen Strong. Now, I gave the bios out in hour number 1 of the show, so we didn't have to waste too much time here. But if you are new to the Kev Baker Show, check out ouralienancestry.net or forgottenorigin.com, and you'll find out more about Evan and Stephen Strong. And here they are. There's Stephen there, ready to go. And it's a little bit of a longer live for you this week, Stephen, than it was the last time. But how you doing, brother? And what have we got to look forward to from you today?
Well, I'm doing well, but strangely enough, we're an hour later, but Evan's still staggering around waking up, but he will be popping in as we go through the day. Yeah, look, today we wanted to cover primarily what we're going to do in our next online presentation, and make sure for those of us who don't attend, they still get to find out. I really, I mean, we make a little bit of money out of that, but we want to make sure the information goes out whether or not people actually pay to join us. So what I thought we'd try and do is we break down our 2-hour talk into 1 hour and go through the major points we're going to focus on today, which unfortunately, Kev, is based around the fact that a gentleman by the name of Chris Stringer, who's considered one of the top archaeologists in the world, referred to what happened in Australia as the greatest archaeological crime of the 20th century perpetrated by a government. So I thought we might go down that path of how the government and what's happened in Australia over the last 50 years, and then lead into the skulls that we found, so people can understand why it is that the government has threatened to put me in jail more times than there are days in a month if we ever get out the information and science associated with these skulls. But it sort of doesn't make sense. Why would the government go to so much trouble to do this? And people often say to me, well, I don't believe you, man. Why would they do this? Well, we wanted to try and explain today in your show and on our online conference why the government, and not just this government in this country, but all governments, have been so actively and concertedly lying about what happened in this country. And honestly, the crime that Stringer speaks about, when I talk about it, you won't believe this could have happened, but it can, because this is Australia.
Oh, that sounds good. This does sound good. And we were watching a little bit of your video you'd put out, I think it was last week, about the kind of covert cultural kind of cover-up that's been going on. You were talking about the Pentagon and how they had come out and things like that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about your story. And you mentioned there, and you've mentioned it in the past as well, that you've literally faced the threat of jail time over what you're talking about. And I want people in the audience, though, to think about this. You know, there's channels and there's information out there that gets hundreds and thousands of views in a couple of days have been up there. The people that put the information out, they don't get any hassle. They don't get any threats of jail. And then there's other people that are trying to put out similar information that get shadow banned. They don't even get their posts seen by 5% of the people that follow them on social media. They struggle to get a couple of thousand views. That when you line this up with the other information I'm talking about, there's a big disparity, because what Evan and Stephen talk about, they back it up with a lot of scientific evidence as well. So you've got to ask yourself, you've got to be really honest. Well, why is it some messages can get out and almost amplified to go viral, yet two guys down in Australia, not only are they struggling to get the message out, one of them's literally been facing jail time. This is what happens when you deal in truth that uncovers the bigger picture. Sorry, Sorry for stealing some of your time there, Stephen, but I think
No,
it's
no,
important
no.
people realise
It's a
that.
valid point, mate. It really is a valid point. I mean, we've been smashed and shadow banned, and I really don't know why they even bother at the moment, because they've managed to keep. I mean, they've dropped our audience this year by about 700% from what we're getting last year, and we've been told by people, we don't know what you're doing anymore, and it's been deliberate. But you're right. In our show, Evan's going to read from some of the official correspondence I've received. And it's a valid point, Kev. I mean, for God's sake, all we're doing is we're just talking about a couple of bones found in Australia. Why would people care and be that vindictive and so it's consistent? I mean, I've received close to, I actually got a surprise because I was assembling for a legal challenge which fell apart, but they tried. I was assembling the emails where we were threatened with jail time, and I thought there was about 10. I went through and found out there were around about 50 different emails, along with at least half a dozen official registered mail where we had to respond, where it was funny how it started, Kev. To begin with, the threat in my first letter way back, it feels like such a long time ago.
It does, doesn't it?
Going back through the whole time, the funds we've been through. The first one was okay, because what it said to me then was they were threatening me with the 3 years or 6 months and 250,000 or up to $750,000 fine. But it was always or. But near the finish, it became both. We didn't get the option. I was for 6 months. It then became 3 years, and it became $1 million. It went to the top of the file. And then I think it was last year, the end of last year, I received my official warning letter. And in that one, I was told the government had more than enough information and proof to put me in jail for the next 3 years and probably longer. And I know my ASIO agent, which is the equivalent of the FBI that I've had for the last 5 years, that was his brief. But they've decided at this moment in time that they will not take me to court, but then reserve the right any time in the future, for any reason they see fit, to resume proceedings against me. So I have my official warning letter, which Evan will read from, because people may not well believe that we could get so many different, and when I explain to people, which I'll do in more detail on the online conference, the defence I loaded against this, and I was so careful, because we've been dealing with the government for quite some time, and believe it or not, they've always been antagonistic, and I've always been one step ahead of their legal team, and I was all the way through here, and they knew that. But it became ridiculous because I was spending more time responding, because sometimes I'd be sent 43 different responses I had to make to each one of the things they've listed. They would spend days putting this together for me and then ring me up to make sure I was going to respond to it. And on one occasion I did say to them, why is it that every phone call and every email you send to me is a threat? He said, oh, no, it's not a threat. We're just reminding you of the law. And then I said, well, how many times do you have to remind me before I don't need to be reminded? To which he replied, never. We just keep doing it. That's our job. So, yes, it's been a fascinating walk down memory lane, but I thought we might go through that again today, Evan. Just a bit of...
Well, I like how the last one came to you about 4 days before Christmas. It was a nice, Christmas card.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? Yeah. It was on the 21st of December. It was my Christmas present. You're not going to jail for the time being, but you might be still going.
If you, it's almost like if you're naughty, we'll get you, but you're not actually quite naughty enough at the moment.
No.
We just want you to know that we're,
Yeah, I think I was sent to the back of the room to sit in the back of the room with my head against the wall and told that if I do it again, I'll actually be sent to the principal's office.
Yeah.
This is crazy. I mean, this is the kind of thing. I mean, what do they think you are? Some kind of radicalized archaeologist? Are you a threat to Australian security, man?
Oh,
you know?
right. It's just, look, I know that people might be shocked by this, but the one thing I've learned over the years is the higher the level of government and the higher the level of authority, the less I believe them and the less I trust them. And I don't know if that continues to today, but we won't go down that path. But let's try and explain to people, if we can, how this all came about and how it led to the greatest. And by the way, when Stringer was talking about the greatest archaeological crime of the century in the world, he wasn't referring to the skulls we had. Oh, no. No. He was referring to skulls that everybody knew were there and all agreed it was there. They're not arguing. I mean, they're arguing about ours, but they weren't arguing about these. So let's go for a bit of, you ready for this, Evan? We'll go through a little trip through memory lane here. Okay, let's start with the state of play when I first got involved in this, which was in school. And I was told that original people had been in Australia for 20,000 years and came from Africa, okay? And that's when I was a kid. And then further down the line, someone said, oh, no, it's actually 40,000 years. We got it wrong by 100%, but don't worry about that. We've got it right now. And everyone was happy with that. And as I was a teenager, I actually saw T-shirts saying we've been here for 40,000 years, worn by Aboriginal people. And everyone was happy with that.
Yes.
That was. And when you went to uni, Evan, it was still 40,000 years, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
No, everyone was very happy with that number. And then they decided, oh, shit, we got it wrong again. We'll move it up another 20,000 years to 60. And that seemed to be where things stayed. And, of course, from there, it's gone up to 120, 150, and it keeps going up. But while that was happening, something else was happening in the field. Skulls were being found. And to begin with, the skulls were gracile, Homo sapiens sapiens, that they all said came from Africa 60,000 years ago, and they landed. Oh, we haven't got to that yet. Okay.
I'm just getting ready.
Oh, good. Evan's got a couple of pictures to come up. Okay. And everyone was happy with that, Kevin. Everyone was it was a neat fit. Oh, we found something at Lake Mungo that Jim Bowler, the grandfather of Australian archaeology, a bit like Chris Stringer, who's like the boss of world archaeology. He was our counterpart, and he told us, everyone, that Lake Mungo 1 and 3 were 40,000 years old, end of story. But then it started to fall apart, because soon after in Lake Mungo, they were finding lots of skulls, and when they got up to WLH 50, they found a robust individual that they felt was 50,000 years old. Now, remember, they were supposed to be landing in the top of Australia 50,000 years ago, and this is in the middle of Australia. And all the settlement patterns for Australia had the original people wandering around the coast for a long period of time, maybe 10,000 years, then starting to make their way up the rivers for the next 10,000 years, and then around about 20 to 25,000 years, beginning settlement in the middle of Australia. Well, we've got dates here. I mean, 50,000 years, that means 75,000 year entry. But the problem was this. WLH 50 is the most robust skull that's been found in the world. Not just Australia, but in the world. We've got a skull thickness around our head here of around about 6 to 7 mils. This was over 20.
Imagine that thing headbutting you.
Yeah, you get headbutted by this guy. If you hit him in the head, man, you're going to break your knuckles. It's just so thick. It was unbelievable. In fact, Josephine Flood, one of the top archaeologists in the country, said the comparison would be an eggshell to an orange peel, to give people a visual idea of the difference in the thickness. Now, Kevin, the problem with this is very simple. We were supposed to have just got off the boat, and already you've got 2 Homo sapiens, and by the way, they call this a Homo sapiens sapien, just like us, that is so dramatically different. How could that come about? They've only just got off the boat, and already they've morphed into something that's nothing like them. So that created a problem. So what did mainstream do? A couple of scientists said, oh, yes, it's the right thickness, but it's a rare form of encephalitis where the skull actually grows 3 times its normal thickness. Never heard of it, to be honest, mate, but it came from some professors. So, Evan, must be right, mustn't it?
Must be.
So everyone said, oh, fair enough. Okay, that fixes that up. So it's just a mutation. It's a one-off. We're all cool with that. And everyone was pretty happy with that. All mainstream was talking about this. Oh, yes, well, we acknowledge it's there, but it could be this rare form of disease that affected this guy's skull and made him look like a freak, which is surprising because he was buried with a lot of respect and reverence. But, you know, you do that to freaks, don't you?
Yes, yes.
So that was all good. And then Cow Swamp. Evan, can you put that up?
Yeah.
Here's an example of what we're talking about, Kerry. This is the type of skulls they were finding. And I can tell you now, mate, if this guy was walking down the street, people would move across. Have you got it up, Evan? Oh, there it is.
Yep.
Okay. So that was all good. Okay, we covered that up with a very convenient lie. And lo and behold, a discovery is made in Cow Swamp where they find about 50 of all and only robust skulls. Well, now we've got a mutation problem of massive order. But maybe they were stupid idiots, Evan, eh? Even though they've got a massive skull bigger than ours and a bigger brain than ours, this was a bit of a problem. But then we found that some of these burials were burial disposal things where they used 4 different techniques. And on one, in a place called Ruka, they found about 150 Tasmanian tiger teeth that were stuck under the skull after all this flesh had come away. They're saying, hang on, what's going on here? This is quite ornate. And they found about 6 different burial techniques. Now, that's bizarre because every other tribe in Australia, Grasshole tribe, only has 1 burial technique. So there were problems here. And that picture we've got now, notice that's a complete skull. They found about 23 like this. So the government did the right thing. They picked all of these skulls up, took them away, examined them, and then, Evan, something strange happened, didn't they?
They disappeared.
They lost them.
No one can find them.
Yeah, they lost all 23 skulls.
Come on.
Oh, no, they did. It was an accident. Be fair, it was an accident, but we tracked it down. The government went into research mode, and they found that either they lost them or maybe they gave them to the Lands Council, who dropped them in a hole somewhere and forgot them. So it was one of the two. Now, remember, this is why Chris Stringer calls this the greatest archaeological crime of the 20th century. And by the way, that is the truth. That's what he called it, okay? And he's right.
Yep.
So all of the skulls have been lost. Now, can you imagine today, they were lost about 25 years ago, with the advances in mitochondrial DNA today, if we had one of those skulls, mate, we'll find out, the first thing we're going to find out is they're not of the same species as what the grasshole skulls are, that are completely different.
Stephen, how does it compare to the one that we've seen before that goes back a long way? You've got pictures of it where it's kind of in situ, and then you see the elongated kind of back to the skull.
Completely different.
Completely different?
Oh, completely different, because the skulls of those ones, the ones without sutures, are 6 to 7.
Yeah.
Right? This one, the ones at Cow Swamp, were around 15 to 17, not the 20, but the 15 to 17.
Got you.
That's still an increase of 250%. But if you look at the way the skulls are made, they've got a massive forehead that slopes upwards and back.
That's what I was looking at
there.
there.
About go completely back. So it's a complete. We'll get to that mob later, because there are at least 7 different species of hominid wandering around Australia that are all supposed to have come from purely Homo sapien grasshole lineage that comes from Africa. Now, the problem with these skulls at Cow Swamp is there's more. The dates went from 30,000 to about 12,000. Now, hang on. These things look ancient and primitive, but they were still around 12,000 years. And then they found other robust skulls in Cossack, West Australia, that were 6,000 years old. Well, this didn't fit in. So, coincidentally, all 23 skulls have been lost, and unfortunately, as much as they've tried to find them, and they have, haven't they, Evan? Mm-hmm. They've looked very hard for them.
They have.
They haven't found all 23 of them. They're gone. Now, as you know, these things often happen in archaeology. It's one of the things with archaeologists. It's a bit like they go to the the supermarket with a shopping list, and then they lose the shopping list, and then they forgot what they were looking for. And I think this is what's happened here.
But don't forget what happened to the actual site.
Oh, I forgot to tell you. This is another coincidence, Kevy. The site itself, okay, Cow Swamp. I've been to it. I went to it. And when I was looking for the other skull, because it was found near it, by the way, which is interesting, isn't it? It was found within about 50 k's of where the skull with no forehead was found. I went there to Cow Swamp, which is not really a swamp because it's in the middle of Australia, and sometimes when it gets wet, it gets a bit boggy. But most of the time it's close to dry. But the Australian government decided to do something to help Cow Swamp site to make it a more pleasant place.
Well, that's nice.
So what they did, they built a big, massive earth levee. No farmers asked for this, right? And they made a square. I've seen it. I come around this hill looking down, and you can see about 50 k's ahead. And I said, what's this? There's a rectangular square of water. Oh, yeah, the government came and did that. They actually made a square about 5 metres, a levee bank of water, of earth, and then filled it in, the whole swamp. So it's just one flat piece of water. That water is not used for irrigation. This is an area that gets 10 to 15 inches of rain per year on a good year. It's not used for irrigation. It's permanently flooded, which means nobody can now, I know this is a coincidence, Evan.
No, yeah.
Because it's in under 5 metres of water, no one can do any more work there.
We're not big on yeah, we don't do coincidence around here, guys. Nah.
No, but what they've done, Kevin, is they've protected it so no one can deface the place anymore now, because no one can get at the skull, so it's saved.
Yeah.
You see what they've done?
Huh.
This is their form of looking after a sacred. Now, this particular site, you've got to remember something. The skulls of these people are bigger and wider and larger than the Homo sapiens of today. They were doing burial techniques that were not done anywhere else in Australia. They were a group of beings, Australian original beings, and they were a completely different lineage. They're not bloody African, and they're not even gracile. Fair income. And why did the species that's taller, stronger, and with a bigger brain, why did they die out when the gracile group didn't? Now, what they say is the original people today are a mixture of the two. Well, you know what? I've never heard of an original person of today that has a skull that's 18 millimetres thick.
No.
That's not true. They did interbreed to an extent, and I've heard original people tell me of gracile people living in their tribe and died within, say, the last 50 years ago. So I think there was a lineage group that continued on, because they were in Cossack at 6,000 years. But this starts to give you a bit of an idea what's going on in this country. So for us to get sets of letters, and I can tell you the last letter we got said they were not going to take me to court, but if I was to do one of two things, I would immediately be sent to court and I would spend my time in jail. And the things I could do that would cause that is, number one, to take the skull that we have outside the front door, or invite an academic, and we have one of the best in the country, who has the skills to analyse this skull, who we've spoken to and wants to do this. If we invite them in for him to do that, I immediately go to jail for that too, because I would be doing science. And that is something that can't happen in our country. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's one group, the robust group, which were here and have now disappeared after they were discovered. 23 skulls were lost. So we have one group. Now, there are many stories about the robust people, and all the original people knew about them and said we knew about them, but they've been ignored. But you've got to remember the original people have other stories of other beings, don't they, Evan?
They do.
I just want to give some background. Another group they talk about are the little people. And of course, everyone laughed when they heard that, about these stupid stories, because they're everywhere. There are so many dreaming stories. In fact, we used to live in a place called Nimbin. And its real name, its proper name is Nimbinja. In the Bunjalung language, that means the place where the little hairy people live. Now, there are stories of the little hairy people wandering around to this day around here, but they can't exist. It's rubbish, isn't it, Evan?
Yeah.
Even after they found hobbits in the second closest island to Australia in Indonesia called Flores, which are now called Homo florensis, and even though Evan's now going to put up a picture that was taken in 1938. Have you sent it across, Evan?
Doing it now.
Of little people. Now, all of these people, the ones you're looking at now, measure between 2'6" to 3 foot. And that tribe up at Corunda was of 150 people, and that picture was taken in 1938. Have you got a picture of Birdsall?
I'll get that up next.
Evan's going to now show you a picture of a guy called Joseph Birdsall who took the picture, who was 5'10", okay? And he's going to be standing next to the chief of that particular
Hold
tribe.
that thought. We'll see it on when we come back, guys. We'll see it when we come back. We're hard on the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are live all the way down under with our good friends Evan and Stephen Strong. I love it when these guys come onto the show. They're giving us a sneak peek into their upcoming conference. You can find out more over at ouralienancestry.net. That'll be held on the 28th of August if you're over in America, or in the UK at midnight. And if you're in Australia, it's going to be a 7 a.m. start in Perth and a 9 a.m. start in the Melbourne time zone. But I urge you all to check that out, and I'll get Evan to tell us more about that before we go away today. But just before the break, it was a perfect cliffhanger because the guys were unveiling some really interesting information here. And during the break, I shared a picture I've often talked about on the show, and I've shown it on streams, of a very small looking entity, very hairy, very dark. It strikes me as being either a cross between a yowie and one of these little people we're talking about, or something very anomalous anyway. And we're going to go back now to Evan and Stephen to hear more about their story.
Okay. Evan's going to put up a picture now. Appreciate your one too. It's deadly.
Yeah.
We've got a picture there of Joseph Birdsall he's going to put up, who stands 5'10", and alongside him, you've got the picture of the elder there, who's about 3'6", I believe. That's the size, and he was the tallest there. But I want you to look at his body and the proportions of his body. And if you were to cover up Joseph Birdsall, and I was to tell you he stood 6 foot high, you wouldn't doubt it.
No,
He's
you're right.
not a dwarf. I want people to understand this. They think, oh, this must be some form of dwarfism. No, it is not. That gentleman is perfectly proportioned as we would be if we were 3'6". Now, remember, the men were taller. The women were about 3 foot to 2'9" to 2'6". And what's interesting with these people, in 1938, this picture was taken. And I've got to tell you something about the little people. We did some research on this, and we found that they were the ones who adjudicated when the tall people could not resolve differences. They were considered to be the wise ones. You must understand that. Normally you think the little people would be picked on and oppressed, but no, they were actually respected. And you can see behind the people, they're all naked. This is Oldway. You can see the buildings they had there, which were dome-shaped buildings, and no one else in Australia built them. And their boomerangs had 4 arms, not 2. They were like propellers, proper propellers. This was an advancement. Now, what's interesting, in 1938, 3 months after that picture was taken, the little people told Joseph Birdsall, we've had enough of what's happening. We can't live with the white people anymore. We're going off into the rainforest and we're living Oldway. And they've been there since 1938. There are rumours of people who've seen them. And actually, we were on site about 1.5 years ago with Harry's from Bondi Rescue and his son. And halfway through, he came up and told his father, I can see a little fella watching us, and he's all, but I can't see his eyes because he's all covered in hair. Now, the group you're seeing there are one type of little person. I noticed the picture you've got is of the little hairy men. Now, they're smaller, right? And they're a different type of little person, and that's what he was seeing. Because what he said, and he told his father this, and we didn't tell him this, Daddy, all he's covered in hair. Hair's growing all over him. I can't even see his eyes. That is the description the original people made of the little people. Remember, we lived in a place that's called the place where the little hairy people live. Yeah. This child didn't know this. He was 6. And he was telling his father, and his father, who's on Bondi Rescue, has been on public, he's on the public media telling people this is what his son saw, and he saw it. But strangely enough, I've given you an example of someone who's seen one, and I've shown you pictures of them. But in Australia, Kev, you're not going to believe this, they don't exist. They're not acknowledged as existing, even though you're looking at a bloody picture of them taken by the top archaeologist at the time, Joseph Birdsall. Everybody knows who he is.
It's really insulting when you think about it. And Uncle Donnie, he was telling us there his ancestors, it's his belief, they were under 5 feet in height. And he was saying that hairy person that I sent you the image of, that was at the same lake that you were talking about.
Yeah, of course. And here's an interesting part. The children at Kurunda are the smallest children in Australia. Think about that for a sec, ladies and gentlemen. They are the smallest because the original people did not, it wasn't just a platonic relationship with the little people. It was quite up close and personal, and it is well known, because I'm a teacher and I hear about this sort of stuff, the children in Kurunda are the smallest children in Australia because they still carry that genetic link between the tall people and the little people. So when we start, and of course, as I said again, there's a commonality in all these stories. It's nothing to see here, ladies and gentlemen. That's the official line. Then Uncle Donnie, I'm sure he's told you occasionally about the tall people, not like the robust ones we spoke about, but the Yowies. There is not a black fella in this country that knows anything about their culture that would deny they exist. They do exist. Oh, no, they don't do that. They don't exist, mate.
That's right.
No. All mainstream have told us it's just a silly idea.
Yeah, officially none of this stuff exists. You know, we're just off our head. Don't believe your blind, your lying eyes. Don't believe thousands of years of dream time.
No,
you know?
No, because we know best, because we have a book and we write in paper, and they didn't. So therefore we know what's true and false, and they don't. So the Yowie people, which have been everywhere, and I've spoken to at least a dozen people who've seen them, they have no neck. And my understanding is, and I've spoken to actually people in the army that took out a camp one day, and they, with their guns, about 20 of them, ran away from the camp. Well, they ran away from the camp. When they come back, the generators have been pushed up and smashed. The tents have been ripped to pieces. And some of the things that weighed hundreds of kilos have been thrown 15, 20 metres, and everything have been smashed. And the army will never go and camp in that area again, ever. I've spoken to people involved in that. But that was reported and ignored. So we get this commonality that leads up to our situation. And I wanted to share with people that, no, this is not unusual. It's the way that things are done in this country and in many other countries. And this is one of the reasons why I have a lot of trouble trusting any government, that anything they say, because our dealings with the government have been from the very beginning lies. Lies after lies after lies. So now what we then come up to is we got a phone call. I'm just grabbing one piece of breakfast here, Evan. Continue with this while I have this.
He got one phone call, and a farmer had been tilling his field and found something.
He dug out 2 skulls. It was on and we've got a pretty good idea the date of these skulls, because it was on a ridge and there were skulls and there was a line of them, and we think there was around about maybe 80 there. That's what the psychic, because we always, I know this sounds bizarre, Kevin, we always take a psychic on board. And we had 2 on that occasion. They're both saying exactly the same thing. There's so many different spirits standing on the top of this ridge. Now, this particular ridge, that one will do, Evan. Just put one up. Okay. He's going to put one up now. This particular ridge is about 2 metres and everything else is flat around there. Now, we do know that the Murray River, which is one of the largest rivers in Australia, ran up against that ridge about 60,000 years ago. And we believe these skulls, all of these skulls, must have been buried before that because they would have overlooked the river because it was a line. And this particular skull you're looking at now, which, as you mentioned before, has no apparent forehead, and it looks like it's an ancient beast of a hominid like Lucy, Australopithecus, with a brain size of about 600 cc. But Evan, could you show them what happens when you look at it from a different angle? Because they might think, well, this thing's as stupid as anything. It's got massive eyes, as you can see, amazingly large eyes, larger than any other hominid ever. But what's more interesting, when you get to look from behind, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see that there is a one big, massive skull that runs backwards. And it runs backwards about 19 centimetres, and the flaring at the back measures about 18 centimetres across. Our skulls are about 13 centimetres across, and they don't flare. And can you see the nose that's still there? It's stuck out and it sticks out in a completely different fashion.
This is one of the most astonishing pictures I've ever witnessed. It really is. I remember the first time I've seen it, and it just... what can you say about that? And for the radio audience, I'll be uploading this to YouTube right after the show, but just think of no forehead and then just this. How long does it go back, Stephen?
This one goes back 19. The other one we've got goes back 17, which makes me think we have a male and a female. This one would be the male, right?
Yep.
And I can tell you now, the back of that skull, you can actually drop a Homo sapiens skull inside this one, and there's plenty of room to wriggle around there. I would say the skull difference is about 350 to 400 cc difference in the size of the brain. So that to me is, so this is what happened. We found this particular skull and we found that it was not, it's just not us. I'm sorry, it's not even close. There was, in fact, when we went through it, I held this in my hand. I realized there was absolutely nothing whatsoever that was similar to what we have. Every part of it was different, even above the nose. Can you see how above the nose, our eyebrow ridge peaks out?
Yep.
It doesn't fold in, it peaks out. The nose starts right at the top of our eyes rather than where we've got ours, and it's got a completely different shape. We've got virtually a Homo sapien has really something close to what I would call a circle where the nose is. This is a triangle. So we had this particular skull, and I remember saying to the farmer at the time, I said, well, didn't you report this to the authorities? And ladies and gentlemen, he did as any very good farmer should do. He did so. He reported to the authorities. The authorities came there. They picked the skulls up, they looked at them, and by the way, there were bones thrown everywhere when I got there, and I was told when they first uncovered it, the skeleton was tight. The knees were up against the chest, the arms were crossed against the chest, and the whole thing is in one spot. So we've got pictures of femur bones and humerus bones thrown everywhere. Now, we got letters, and one of the things we were challenged for doing was desecrating the site. When we left the site, I covered that skull with dirt, and they put a lid over the top, and we sealed it. So we didn't desecrate the site. We honoured it. In fact, when I started working on that, I took 12 sacred rocks and placed it around the skull and gave this ceremony before I started touching the damn thing, because I knew. And there's a good picture. Could you go back one? Evan's going to put up there. There's a picture of what I received. This is what I saw when I got there. And this is not the way it was to begin with. They just threw the bones everywhere. Well, you don't leave them exposed like that. You're supposed to cover them up. There were bones shattered all over the place. It was a disaster. So we covered it up when we finished, because I didn't dig down because the whole skeleton's down there. And when you look at that skeleton, you can see the femur bone there. But on the other side, there was a humerus bone, and I might have mentioned this before. The humerus bone that humans have is 30 centimetres. This one was 45, and we hadn't got to the elbow joint. So what we're dealing with is a being that's not even a hominid. I'm sorry, it's got nothing to do with us. And so what we did is we were given permission to go on site. I had never met any of the people. There were 4 cars that took us to different sites, not just this one. They had given, the farmers around there were cooking food for us each night. There were about 18 people involved in the group. And we went to this particular site. I had 2 elders I met, and I said, look, when I go on site, you're my boss. Everything I do is with your permission because this is not my land. Well, we thought we were doing the right thing.
We did.
Yeah. It turns out this group that organised this, and they funded it. In fact, I'd never met them until that morning, and I made sure I never met them before and never spoke to them. There was another gentleman who spoke to them and then would pass on information to me, so I never had direct contact with them at all. So when we got there, and there's a picture of the 2, and that's a good one to put up, Evan.
Okay.
Because you'll see there, when you see this next picture, the farmer had put these 2 massive planks of wood, or sheets of wood, and we covered the skulls. When we're finished, we covered them up. So we spent our whole time there, and when I touched it, I never touched them with my fingers because I didn't want to transfer DNA. We did this properly. And at the end of it all, I put up an article, started writing about it, and then I started getting correspondence from the government, didn't I, Evan?
Yeah.
And what they wanted to do was put me in jail because what they said was that you had conducted and arranged this site and never got official permission. Well, here's the point. I didn't arrange it. I didn't know where I was. I came down to a place I'd never been before and was invited by people I'd never spoken to. Go back to that one, Evan. Or go back to one I want to talk to next. Okay, so that was the first part. Now, the second part, Evan's going to put up another picture now. And now I'm going to introduce a new form of hominin. Because next to the first one was the second one. And you can see what I think happened was a blade came through and unearthed them. And I think the first one there on the right got most of the blade.
Yeah, it looks that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you can see bits of skull laying on the ground there.
Yep.
It got smashed, right? Now, what was interesting about that one, and that one was buried less than 1 metre away from the skull we've seen. Now, the skull we've seen, we've spoken about, had its 2 front teeth pulled out completely. There was no shredding inside. It was complete. That is the same initiation that they gave original people in that area until Cook came there. So this person was buried with...
Uh-huh. Are we still there, folks? Let me try and
So they're different. And what's really interesting is that skull is just as massive, Kevin, as the other one, and far bigger than Homo sapiens sapien. It's an even bigger skull. Now, what was interesting about that one is we had 2 crews. I was working on the no forehead skull myself, and I had 2 other people I chose who'd been on site before. I was directing them, and they were excavating that one. And with that one, all of the teeth from that fellow had 3 roots, and they curved outwards. And that's different. Try and pull them out when you go to the dentist, mate. That's going to hurt. They didn't curve inward. They curved outwards massively. And what was really interesting is on the back of that skull was a 1.5 centimetre by 1.5 centimetre perfect square of skull. And I looked at it and said, what the hell is that? I couldn't work it out. Anyway, I kept that in the back of my head.
Yeah.
And when we went and collected another set of bones from the flat-headed people, from a professor of a Victorian University who reported to the government, and they said nothing to see here, and he gave us that skull. He gave us we were talking about the time, I told him about the other skull. And he asked me a bit about it. I said the weirdest thing was this 1.5 metre, a centimetre square knob at the back. He said, hang on for a sec. He went and got a book and he showed me a picture of the same square knob on the back. And ladies and gentlemen, lo and behold, guess what? That is the only time you'll ever see something like this, because it only exists on the back of a Neanderthal skull. So what we've now got is next to this no forehead skull, we have a Neanderthal. But Neanderthals were never found in Australia. They're supposed to come from Africa. Well, this one was buried alongside a being that we've never seen before, and we date this at over 60,000 years, which makes it the oldest skulls in Australia. And that one is also still sitting in the burial site. And by the way, I can tell you the government has acted. They've closed down the site and no one's allowed to go near it. And if they do, they'll be put in jail. So they've done something about the site. This is their way of protecting it.
Stephen, do you think if you were able to access that area and excavate a larger swathe of the land, do you think it's going to end up like that Siberian cave where they were all hanging out together? We're going to find that there was various entities around at the same time.
Oh, I think there's more in there, mate. I think you're going to find there is a variety of different skulls there and none of them fit.
Yeah.
Because honestly, everyone will tell you Neanderthal is not in Australia. Yes, they are. And if you want to argue with me, go down to that site, have a look at that skull that I've picked up, and there was about 8 people who saw that square knob on the back. We had a filmmaker there. We got someone to come down and film this, and he was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for documentaries, because we figured they're all going to say we photoshopped this.
So we brought and to be fair, I mean, we only seen a handful of images there, but for the listening audience, you think of an archaeological dig, you know, it had everything. It had the measurements, it had the white, Stephen had the white gloves on, a little brush out. It's not like this was just a bunch of people just going and digging up and kind of ruining a site. This was done properly. Archaeological kind of standards.
We were so careful, mate. What we did was I banned anyone from digging with anything but wooden rulers, lest the metal chips the actual bone. We didn't want that to happen. And everything, we didn't dig down. All we did was we unearthed what was laying on the surface, because we weren't going to dig down, because if I dug down, mate, I would have been booked that day and I'd still be in jail. I'm under threats from before I got to this site, I'd already got letters from another site, hadn't I, Evan?
Oh, yeah.
I'd already been threatened for the Standing Stone site, and I already got phone calls from and the whole thing, 45-minute belligerent phone calls threatening me. I knew if I dug down, I'd be done for. So I didn't. All I did was I thanked these guys for leaving in such an appalling state of disrepair. I could reach all this stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can add to that. When we went and saw the academic who gave us 8 pieces of the skull we've put back together and we've reassembled, and Evan, if you could put up a picture of, that one there. Yeah. Evan will put up a picture now, and you look on the right-hand side as I sit, you've got the Homo sapiens that we know of, and the left-hand side is the one we're dealing with, and the skull is not right. That skull they've got there, the guy that did that, he actually worked he does the faces for Alien and Predator. He gave it much more of a sort of forehead than what it has, but that doesn't matter. When you look at those 2 faces, you can see all the differences there, and they have nothing in common with each other. One is far wider. It is far bigger. It's got massive eyes. It's got a massive nose. It's got a huge, huge jaw, much wider than the other one. They have nothing in common with each other, and they're buried alongside each other. But what is interesting is, with the remade one, we were given another skull. And that one, I'm told by the people who remade this, I thought it was Denisovan. They have confirmed, no, it's not Denisovan. It's Homo sapien. Not sapien, but the sort of ancestor of where we came from, which is only ever been found in Australia? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have an archaic Homo sapiens sitting in our house right now, and there's a picture of it. Could you put it up, please, Evan? And what they did with this one, and we've never seen this before, is this particular one, every bone, after the skin rotted off, and notice it's got a big forehead, every bone there, you can see the side there where the eyebrow ridge is, and look how thick the skull on that one is. Can you go back one, please, Evan?
Wow.
Look the thickness of that, ladies and gentlemen, and try and tell me that's a Homo sapien. But I'm told this is an archaic Homo sapien. But what's fascinating, and I know we're nearly out of time, and we'll go into more detail with this, you can put the Homo sapien skull inside that and there's room to wiggle. There's a picture of it. I'll go back one, you had it, when it's put back together. It's got a huge eyebrow ridge, it's got a massive forehead, even larger than ours, and it's a bigger head than ours, which means this. If that is what both the experts, and by the way, one of these experts worked with the Australian Museum and did skull reconnections, that's what he did for a living. He said, mate, that is an archaic Homo sapien. It's got a bigger skull than us today, which means, ladies and gentlemen, our skulls have got smaller. Think about this. When we put all these things together, we have now found 6 hominids, 4 in Australia and 2 outside, that have bigger skulls than Homo sapiens. But you know what Homo sapiens mean? The word sapien means wise twice. And I know we're nearly finished, but I've learnt one thing about people. When people keep repeating something time after time, it means they're normally lying. We've been called wise twice, yet when you put us up against a Denisovan, a Neanderthal, Homo heidelbergensis, the ones we've got, you'll find that we've got a smaller skull than all of them. And what it seems to be showing us is that even with an archaic Homo sapien, it's got a bigger skull than us. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a brief introduction to the bones and skulls that are found in Australia and the ones that have been denied. The pictures we showed you of the little people, but they don't exist. The stories of the Yowies, but they don't exist. And then you've got ones that do exist that we found, and guess what? They still don't exist because we can't get them out because the government have made it clear we would be breaking the law and we go to jail.
We're out of time. I love you guys. I know that makes you uncomfortable. Check out our alienancestry.net wherever you are. Make it TFR.